Hoş geldin and a warm welcome today from Ankara to the TÜRK IT podcast. Today we want to discuss an interesting topic that I personally have found a lot of interest in, which is the communities here in Turkey that pursue academic and professional careers, in particular from Africa. Why is it so important? First of all, of course, I want to flag here my own format where I went quite deep into these topics, Afrika für Allmanns. But secondly, because as you know, maybe also in Germany, we have a lot of international students. However, until last year at least, the number of international students from Africa was somewhere around 30,000. And the majority of them came only from 3 countries in Northern Africa, which was Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. And we had from the sub-Saharan Africa only Nigeria with something around 1,000 people. Contrastingly, from countries like Turkey, India, China, you have above 40, 50 and 60,000 students in Germany. And at the same time, we see that Turkey by now has accumulated a total of 60,000 students from multiple African countries, very well diversified. And yeah, for that today I speak with 2 students. First with Rebecca Ewang, who actually did her master and bachelor degrees here in Turkey and now also works in Turkey. And we want to discuss her journey and her insights from that together.
TÜRK IT is the podcast about German-Turkish relations. We talk about classic topics like economy, politics, history and security, but also about shared culture, from football to the arts. In conversations with experts, we explore the challenges and highlight the potential of a strong bridge between Germany and Turkey.
So a warm welcome to you, Becca, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Freddie. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, maybe just for clarity, we know each other already for a while. We met 8 years ago in an academic debating competition here in Turkey. And so I could also witness your journey here a bit in Ankara and,
For sure.
and in Istanbul. But maybe for our audience, could you give us maybe a brief overview of your time here in Turkey? What motivated you to come here and what is your current situation?
Yeah, for sure. I think I came to Turkey in 2015. So it's been almost a decade now that I've been here. I came originally to do my undergraduate. I studied international relations at Ankara University. And originally, I did have a couple of family members that had previously studied in Turkey. Mainly at that time, when my family members had studied, Turkey was famous for medicine and those kind of degrees. But the geopolitical situation in Turkey was very interesting to me. So, that mix between Europe and Middle East and kind of being the bridge between the two. For someone who's interested in politics, international relations, this was a really interesting opportunity and a place to study. Mm-hmm. And of course, it goes without saying that there were a lot more scholarship opportunities here. And so I was offered a full ride and I came and I studied and the rest is history.
And so after that bachelor degree, you also went on and did your master studies here?
So I did start my master's. I did start it, interestingly. But what I can say about the education system is I did my undergraduate and that was 70% in English and 30% in 70% in Turkish, actually, rather, and 30% in English. And so when I got into my master's program, it was going to be a similar situation. And once you start working, I was, finding that I could not keep the passion up with a different language as well. But yeah, maybe one day, maybe I'll go back and get that completed. Okay. So I did start.
And of course, you mentioned it already. From the outside, especially, I guess, for Germans, we always ask ourselves, Turkey, that is a very interesting choice, especially from, you did your high school in South Africa. That's not around the corner. I mean, maybe from Egypt, you could assume, the Mediterranean, just jump over there. But what was your connection previous to your decision to go to Turkey? Did you have any, cultural exchange with Turkey or any student program that was there or connection to the language?
Honestly, no. That's an interesting part. Apart from a couple of family members that I knew that had studied here and had suggested it as a possible place to come to, I had not really had any interaction with Turkish people. I did not know much about the Turkish culture, and I for sure didn't know the language. It's actually interesting. When I was on the flight to come to Turkey for the first time, I sat next to a friend of mine. Well, now we're friends, but at that time we didn't know each other. And she took out a book and she had written all this, vocabulary that she was going to prepare, like how to say hello, how to say, how are you? And I guess it just never registered to me that I should probably do the same. So I came to Turkey with absolutely no language skills.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then academic Turkish, I assume, is like something, B2, C1 equivalent, right?
Yes. So I had to have a C1 level to go and get started with my coursework.
How long did it take you then to get into your academic journey?
So the Turkish course is 9 months to get to C1 officially. But I would say really to perfect the language, it takes some more time than that. I mean, of course, when you're immersed in it with school and all of these things, it helps with that. But to really speak, it definitely took me a couple of years.
But that was all basically part of the scholarship program. That you come here, have a 9 months full language sort of training, and also with accommodation and everything, and then go to that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had all of that included within that scholarship program. And I think that was kind of the main aim of it, was to have this kind of cultural exchange that would happen. And then once we complete our studies, we take these, new cultural networks that have been formed and, expand that within our home countries.
Yes. And since you also mentioned, I'm sure there were also other alternatives. We see, for example, many African students nowadays going to countries like China or also in Western Europe or also America. Was there maybe some interest of you also to deviate from that idea, or are you still in touch maybe with friends from back then who did other decisions? How do you look back basically on that choice? Do you still consider it the perfect one, or what is maybe your comparison to the other options you had on the table?
That's a good question. And of course, I think there are benefits to either choice that someone would make. I have no regrets about the choice that I made. And I think that's because Turkey is, or at least, especially when I was a student, was uniquely situated that I could work and study at the same time. So I had an opportunity to do particular internships, to tutor, to, support myself that I don't know I would have necessarily had in those other environments. So for that reason, I'm really happy with the choice I made.
And do you see also some differences now since you started in, I think, 2015, you said, and now 9 years later, and we saw also from the statistics, the numbers are constantly increasing. Is there now a different pressure maybe when you look to back to the new arrivals basically, or do you think it has been more or less the same as when you started?
No, I think there is definitely a higher level of pressure, right? So now it's a more popular destination for things like education. So the ability to get in and find your groove is obviously a little bit harder than it was when I came.
And now intuitively, one would think that when the Turks set up such a program, it's part, I guess, of their diplomatic approach also to Africa, right? So their dream case would probably be that Becca then is also at some point with a perfect Turkish connection back in South Africa and doing Turkish company business or something. Now you went actually the more sustainable path and chose to stay here in Turkey and to also do a job here. How was that experience? Was it for you easy now with your bachelor degree and your experiences to land a job also here? Because it is, I'm sure, especially here in Ankara, a competitive market and with a lot of young people.
Yeah.
How did that happen that you actually landed a job also in a good position?
Yeah. I think it is a little bit of hard work and a lot of luck. I don't think that there are, as many opportunities as we would like for people to, get into certain professional careers. I acknowledge that perhaps with the kind of degree I studied and what I was interested in doing, I studied international relations. So anything that kind of had to do with international, business development, technology was something that I was going to be keen with. And I got lucky in landing roles that got me to do that kind of work. And so I think what is really key there is the networks that you're able to build. And I think that still plays into the role of what they wanted from us from that scholarship. So how I'm working the job I have now is because I had experience from companies that were looking for Turkish and English speakers or people who could play that role of being the bridge between Turkey and Africa. And after I had that as my foundation, taking the step into where my career is now or where my career is heading, hopefully, was easier.
So maybe just to give us a little insight, you are working now with a Turkish or a foreign company here in Turkey that is also interconnected to Africa, or what is more or less the profile of your position?
Sure. Yeah. So originally when I started working, that is the kind of company I was working for. They were focusing heavily on investments within the African market. So mainly working closer with government bodies within the African continent. Now I have shifted and I'm working still within that relations space, but for a international company with Turkish founders, and majority of my clients are international, but the workforce is majority Turkish.
Okay, interesting. And now that from that experience, where would you see maybe the benefit of Turkey as a partner, maybe for potentially, I don't know, South Africa or to Kenya and other countries?
Yeah.
What do you think Turkey brings on the table that maybe offers a unique selling point also to the African market?
I think there is the ability between the relationships of the people. So there is, and there has been now, a large alumni that's come out of Turkey. There are very few countries in Africa where you'll go and there isn't someone who knew someone who studied in Turkey or studied in Turkey themselves. And I think that's a great way that when you're growing your business between Turkey and Africa, there is always someone that creates that familiarity. And I think that's important when you're doing any sort of international business, to be able to have trust. The chances of you trusting someone who's a Turkish alumni is higher.
A curious question, because of course we know Turks are very hospitable people, they're very generous, but at times, especially in Ankara, I notice also it's not the most international place, right? So compared to other 6 million inhabitant cities, I assume it's still developing into an international hub.
Yeah.
Maybe looking back now, what would you say was your biggest challenge on your either academic or professional career? And maybe, I hope also you had a chance to overcome it. Maybe give us some insight. What could be some struggles someone would expect that chooses to study and work also in Turkey? Is there something you remember well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there was, so the demographics have changed a lot since 2015, not just in terms of the foreigners that you see within Ankara, but also of the Turkish people as well. I know this is not a experience that a lot of foreigners have, and some of them have really, really great, immediately get integrated into Turkish society. It wasn't really my case. I was very much within my own kind of African community, and I kind of stayed in that bubble probably longer than I should have, because I felt that once I started working is when I saw myself become more integrated and, actually have Turkish friends and get to experience some aspects of Turkish culture that maybe I would have never experienced previously. So those were kind of some of the challenges. It was a little bit isolating. There are obviously a lot of programs that are more focused towards men, or there are more abilities for things for men to gather together in spaces, and I don't think we had that as much as women or girls. And so what ended up happening is, as the African community or as the foreigners, we started making those spaces for ourselves. Fantastic initiative, and I definitely think it was the right thing to do, but it would have been lovely if we had that with Turkish women as well.
So you mean like extracurricular?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, any way that we could have created that kind of inclusion and, the mixture of the two from the very beginning.
And would that be also one of your advices now to a country like Turkey or another country that is interesting in becoming attractive to young professionals and top graduates from Africa? Or where would you see is still some potential on how to facilitate maybe also their development together with a Western, or in this case Asian, Eurasian, Afro-Eurasian, whatever Turkey is? It's hard to define a partner like that.
Yeah, I think definitely it would be more encouraging those kind of programs that raises the awareness. I think sometimes there is this assumption that because when you think Turkey, you think really strong Islamic state or a Muslim kind of country. Being able to share with people that there are other aspects to it, that it is a diverse place, that it is a place that's livable and an enjoyable space for different groups or communities. If that was put out there more, I think that would definitely continue to make it attractive, alongside the fact that it's in comparison to places like maybe Germany or in Europe, it is more affordable education-wise on the whole scale.
Okay, and is that maybe also, or would you recommend that also then sometimes to other African high school graduates, the back of 2014, what would be your advice to her regarding her choice of future career?
Yeah, I would say keep going. Go. I definitely would. I was on a scholarship, but if I think of, the cost of education at the time in 2014, 2015, it definitely was much more affordable in comparison to some of the other options that were out there. And so I had a couple. I was accepted into unis in South Africa. I had some options in the States. But when you think about not just the education, but the ability to be an independent person, to travel, to do other things, it's not just the school fees that you have to take into consideration. And so when you think about all those things, I think Turkey was the right choice for me.
That's very nice because, I mean, you come from South Africa, which I would say also regarding developments or GDP per capita numbers is not really far away from Turkey. It's not like you had to make a sort of change of system to get a proper education. You have great universities there. And maybe also for the listeners, then it's a sign that there's a lot of potential even on equivalent basis, and that it's also worth it to pursue. And maybe also potential for a country like Germany or others to learn from Turkey's approach and, hopefully also have such gifted young professionals in their country. So
hopefully.
Yes. Thank you very much, Becca. And for all of you guys that want to hear a bit more of her, we conducted an interview on your second or third home country, Kenya. If you want to check that out, Afrika für Allmanns, you'll also find it in the show notes. And with that, a very good Iyak Shamla to all of you guys. Yeah, today we have a second perspective now on the situation of the African communities here in Turkey. And, as we previously already had a friend of mine, Rebecca, to interview, also now we have the top expert of my previous podcast, Afrika für Allmanns. He has been a guest already on 3 formats. And together now we will discuss his perspective from an Eastern African point of view, his journey in Turkey. And for that, I welcome very warmly Edwin Sosthenes. Hoş geldin.
Hoş buldum, Mr. Freddy.
Teşekkür ederim. Edwin, maybe just to give us a little overview, you have been here in Turkey now for quite some time. If I remember correctly, just like Becca and also our production head, Chandre, for roughly 9 years.
Close to that.
How was that? How was your journey? What made you first come in touch with Turkey? And then how did that process take place to actually start your studies here?
Mr. Freddy, first of all, it's my pleasure to be back at Africa for a month and TÜRK IT Easy podcast. It's always a blessing to be here. And responding to your question, I would like to make something like a comparison between Turkey and Germany. Of course, Germany would be more captivating to the hearts and mind of many people. However, Turkey offered a different perspective to me as an African. And, I'm more of a history guy. So I wanted to do my higher education, master's and PhD abroad. And Turkey came top because you have most of the civilization lied between this Anatolian heartland.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I don't study history per se, but I wanted just to see these stuffs with my naked eyes. In the same time, I wanted also to continue studying. But that's not the only factor. The other factor is the possibility of furthering my education via scholarship program. I mean, with Turkey, you have scholarships like Turkiye Bursları. With Germany, you have scholarships like DAD, which are quite lucrative. And some universities in Germany and both Turkey also do offer these kind of scholarships. However, the Turkish scholarships was quite interesting for me because they offered a lot compared to other scholarships like DAD. But that doesn't mean that I'll try to downgrade the DAD scholarship and its contribution to the African continent. And apart from that, you also have the factor of economies of. So Germany proved to be a bit expensive compared to Turkey.
Definitely.
By that time, 2015, it was more or less the cost back home, like me coming and studying here in Turkey. So I think that's it.
Your case is also interesting because now we heard from Becca, since she decided already at the age of a high school student to take that step and go into Turkey. You, in fact, have studied your bachelor degrees already in Dodoma, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did in St. John's in Tanzania, Dodoma.
In the Ankara of Tanzania, so to say, in the middle of the country.
Yeah, middle of the country.
And so you have a sort of comparison of the academic systems. Maybe take us a bit back. What was your biggest surprise when you started first studying here in Turkey? How would you describe what was unique about the Turkish academic system?
Okay, first of all, you missed out on something. I studied from the capital of Tanzania, Dodoma, and by the grace of God, I also blessed to come and study in the capital of the country of Turkey, in Ankara.
Yeah,
going straight to the Ankara University. So the first thing would be the rewarding experience to learn a new language. At first, it was like, sorry, I'll use this word. It was like hell, because I was like, I'm used to A, E, I, O, U. You can have it in Swahili like A, E, O, U or U.
Yeah.
However,
Just
like landing in Istanbul and finding the airport written Istanbul with a cap. You see, it's similar to mine.
Yes.
Istanbul with a cap. Istanbul. What was this? It was a shop.
You mean the eye with a
With
on
a
top?
dot.
Yeah, the two eyes. I still
Yeah.
don't understand
So
that to some
like
extent. Yes.
at first I say, okay, let it be like a roller coaster. You know, when you start riding, you say, okay, let me move with the experience. But over time you say, oh my God, maybe I might not be able to make it. But I thank God through the perseverance, like learning the language helped me also try to open and unlock other opportunities. I mean, if I'd gone to other countries, it would have been more or less the same. Going back to the question between the comparison of Tanzanian and Turkish education system, obviously the Turkish system is quite better. I know I'm a bit of nationalistic African, but I would give credit where it's due. There's more of the practical. We are more into theory, and with this, we need a bit of reforms to our education system. If I have to compare between the Turkish and the education system in Germany, I would say the German education system is more advanced because you have a bit of more practical and theory combined. But that doesn't negate that Turkey doesn't have a bit of practice. It's there, but it's less.
So you have already engaged a lot and researched a lot on how the German system works. I mean, for clarity reasons, also in Tanzania, there's a natural connection due to the historical past,
Yes.
where the colonial past also, it is always sort of omnipresent. I think Germany still as a destination, maybe. And but you didn't choose to deviate from Turkey. You went on with your master's, and now also you're pursuing a PhD in Turkey.
Yeah.
What was your decision to keep going on and do your entire academic career here in Turkey?
After learning the language, I told you it unlocked other opportunities. So after my master's, I did my entire master's in Turkish. I mean, I had 2 or 3 courses in English. However, some lecturers at the universities were quite supportive. Like I would do some of my assignments and exams in English. However, my entire master's was in Turkish. So after experiencing that, I said, okay, I was able to get past this big hurdle. Why couldn't I try for my PhD? Unfortunately, with my master's, it was Turkish government scholarship. It was sponsored. For my PhD, I had to dig down my pockets and try to continue the journey. I finished my master's close to the pandemic. So with me deciding to continue here, I didn't have more options. And, with COVID in play, lots of countries were closed. So it became more of the only way to continue my education. However, the best thing is that after suffering all the Turkish trouble with my PhD, I thank God the university that I applied to was able to offer my PhD in English language. So that became an added advantage and an extra motivation for me to continue my education here.
We heard already that especially also for women, the integration into the system here in Turkey, maybe during your studies, was not that easy. Maybe just to share also with us your story. What were your biggest challenges in your times here in Turkish universities, or also in everyday life? What was your maybe a story to exemplify a bit this the cultural difference that clearly was there? Sure.
Obviously, the first would be the cultural shock. When it comes to the cuisine in Turkey, they have lots of oil into the food. So that was quite problematic. I mean, our way of life and the way of life is quite different. However, we had the commonalities like things like rice and macaroni, which is similar to spaghetti, and chicken, beef. It was quite the common. So when it comes to food, it was not much of a problem. My student life was better. You know why? Because I was a master's student. For master's and a PhD, you don't get lots of trouble. However, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. They do exist. Because obviously, as it is in any country, you'd have some people who are quite problematic and less open-minded. And you have more of the open-minded. I think that most of my professors at universities for both my master's and PhD were open-minded and embraced the diversity. And yeah, we would have one or two discussions. Sometimes things will go astray. However, it was just for the sake of trying to build on the diversity and embracing the differences. Yeah.
Now, other than Becca, you actually also went on to move into a different city, not only in Ankara, but you also spent some time, if I don't mistake, in Antalya, right?
Yeah.
And have also been plenty of times to Istanbul. How would you maybe, because from the outside, we are in Germany very, I would say, Istanbul focused and maybe like to the touristic places, Bodrum and others. For you, from an expat point of view, how is the everyday life in these different cities? And do you see also regarding maybe the hospitality towards foreigners, how's the situation from your experiences now in all these different cities?
Turkey has 7 different regions. So, and these regions portray different hospitality. Most of the Turkish people are hospitable. However, when you move close to the sea, I mean, the Mediterranean and Aegean and a bit of Black Sea, the people tend to be more hospitable.
Okay.
Maybe, I mean, because they're more in contact with the foreigners in terms of tourism. The central Turkey is quite different because maybe, again, they have not been able to come into contact with more of the foreigners. I mean, the hospitality, when the issue is like meeting people who are open to embrace the differences and the culture. And as you stated there, Turkey is not only about Istanbul. So, after knowing that, anyway, I first landed in Istanbul. I went to Ankara. Then over the course of time, I think I visited close to 40 cities now, or maybe 40 and counting. I experienced different welcoming between those. But as I told you, the general one is like when you move close to the seas, people tend to be more hospitable compared to the ones which are in the inland.
I understand. And when you speak now to friends or relatives at home in Tanzania, is there also a place you would advise them if they could choose to study here? Or, I mean, because we heard now 2 students, ex-students from Ankara University, is that even possible as an African who comes here to choose a city? So is that possible? And B, which one would you advise maybe as a young Edwin to try?
If it's a self-sponsored student, it's possible because obviously you have the money so you can dictate the play. And indirectly, yes, you can. Indirectly, you can also choose because, I mean, most of the scholarships offered, they would give you a list of universities. You'd make up to 12 selections. Some scholarships, maybe 6 selections. And then they would pick out the ones from your choices and they'll send you there. So, I mean, if you make good choices, you'd be in a position to go to a place where you want.
Which would that be, in your opinion? What would be the most suitable place, maybe also to pursue an academic career here? And
I would say Ankara.
Yeah.
Again, because Ankara is more cosmopolitan, student and administrative, and it's friendly. However, the second one, I wouldn't go for Istanbul because it's already crowded. I'd go and with me coming from Dar es Salaam and Mwanza, so the sea and the lake is there. I wouldn't like to see them a lot. And you have another option, which is called Eskişehir.
Okay.
It's more of a student city. I mean, the entire city is more of a student-friendly city. So that would be the second option. There are some upcoming cities as well, like Isparta, Karabük, Adana. However, again, Antalya or Istanbul, Izmir, there are also choices, top-notch choices for students. However, they tend to be a bit warmer.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting to hear. As we are in Germany thinking we have a lot of capital cities and 1 million inhabitant cities, but Turkey is full of them. It's quite abundant of large hubs.
Of course, Turkey, the population is close to 85, 86 million.
Yeah. But I mean, the same in our country. And however, they seem, I mean, maybe it's less densely populated in some cases, but shifting also then naturally towards also Germany and Turkish in comparison. As you know now, we also discussed it, the podcast tries to show also the different sides and also the complexity of this relationship. And maybe just if you could give some advice or your opinion on the attractiveness of Germany as a hub for African students, of international students. Is there something in your opinion they could learn from Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, plenty. I'll just name a few. obviously we had a bit of discussion before, or I would say like Turkey tried to understand the needs of Africans when they established these Turkish scholarships. So I'm sure maybe they made something like a market research and how to, and they did not dictate most of the terms. So they tried to make it as more as lucrative and less of the impediments towards the application. I mean, most students in Africa would love to study in Germany, but the first impediment would be the language. Like
But you
most
have
of
to learn
universities, yes, you need to learn before. B2.
There's no German 9 months like
It's
in
not
your
that.
case. Okay.
Like when I came here, I knew a bit of, as a history guy, Ottoman Empire. I knew the president and things of the like. That's it. I didn't know much. All the other stuff I learned from here, from zero. I mean, but with Germany, it's quite different. Most of the universities, B2 level of German.
Minimum requirement.
You don't have it, you can't even apply.
Yes. Otherwise, I guess only English would be an option. But
there you are.
Still.
And back then, you also have things like student application fee waiver. I'm not sure if it currently exists here. Some universities are still waiving. I mean, but with German universities, they still have it. So, and the flexibility of the scholarship, it's not that lucrative over time, but back then it was quite a top-notch opportunity not to miss. But with DAD, they try. However, there are certain aspects of the Turkish scholarship which you don't get with DAD in Germany.
Okay.
Because I've had some friends who have been to both and they shared those experiences.
Yeah. Do you want to go a bit in the details there? What do you think we can learn from the Turkish system to attract young and aspiring people from Africa?
I would say, first of all, when you're coming here when you're going abroad for your master's and whatever, you need a place to stay, accommodation. It needs to be sorted out, at least for that 1 year or 2 years of you trying to adjust, because you're in shock. How am I going to adapt? How am I going to adjust? The accommodation. The other thing, the insurance. You also need it. Okay, even the cuisine, the meals, even though sometimes they may not be closely related to the ones from your country, but when you have it there, like you don't think about the food a lot. So with Germany, yes, they give you some money, but you need to think and budget. Like I need to find a cheaper option for food. I need to do this and that. But with the Turkish scholarship, at least for the first 1 or 2 years, you have them.
Interesting.
And then afterwards, you can find your way. So at least that adaptability period, you don't get lots of hurdles to get by. Yeah, that's something which I think the German DED and other countries as well could learn.
Okay.
From.
Yeah, very interesting to do some initial investment in the language, because that is essentially also what you need to integrate yourself. I mean, master in English in Germany, to be fair, it will help you to move on, but you want to build a future in Germany, you need German. Yeah. And secondly, to have a full package for young students to actually start off, and then from there on, build a solid base a few years and then go on. Thank you very much for the insights, Edwin.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure as always, and looking forward to the next show.
Look forward to the next show as well.
TÜRK IT Easy is the podcast about German-Turkish relations. We talk about classic topics like economy, politics, history, and security, but also about shared culture, from football to the arts. In conversations with experts, we explore the challenges and highlight the potential of a strong bridge between Germany and Turkey.